A scandal that cost Afghanistan's Kabul Bank $900 million. The new report says political meddling is preventing efforts to find out why it happened. Just who is to blame and what can be done to deal with corruption in Afghanistan? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Rida Fakhri. Welcome to the program. It is a scandal that began nearly 3 years ago, and now, thanks to an independent audit, Kabul Bank is once again in the spotlight. A new report says the bank funneled $900 million into the pockets of the political elite. Jennifer Glass has more.
This is Dubai, with its luxury real estate few Afghans could ever afford. And this is Kabul Bank, where a small group of well-connected Afghans became rich. But 2 years ago, when word got out that there had been questionable deals, customers panicked and took out their savings. The allegations included fraudulent property deals and massive loans to officials in President Hamid Karzai's government. Now, a report into that scandal, which some feared could bring down the economy, says those fraudulent loans totaled more than $900 million.
It is difficult to perceive that somebody is receiving a loan and not being required to pay it back regularly would at least not have a sense that something is going wrong in the bank.
Drago Kos heads the committee that's produced the most comprehensive report yet on Kabul Bank. He says what many here have long believed, that a corrupt elite benefited at the expense of many Afghans and did so with the help of those close to President Karzai.
Those guys who are organizing the scheme knew perfectly well that they will be protected if they establish contacts with some of the decision makers in this country.
There's no evidence the president benefited from the loans, but his brother, Mahmoud Karzai, did. But he denies any wrongdoing and says he has paid back the loan. Only about a third of the money and assets have been recovered.
When the fraud was discovered, Kabul Bank was the largest in the country, with about a third of all banking assets and more than 1 million depositors. The cost of the bailout and recovery is estimated to equal about 5% of the country's GDP.
It's had a political cost, too. At home and abroad, President Karzai was seen as being soft on corruption. In response, he formed a special tribunal, which is now trying 22 defendants. This one, Wahidullah Ferozi, denies he owes the bank nearly $8 million.
I just did my job and delivered money for a security firm, nothing else.
Ferozi happens to be the cousin of the former chief executive of the bank. Many who've been implicated are closely connected with the bank's former officers. Running the tribunal is one of the many things the report says Afghanistan needs to do better in order to ensure there's not another scandal like this one. Jennifer Glass, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
So how did Kabul Bank end up here? It was founded by the international poker player Sherkan Farnood back in 2004. In 2009, Afghan authorities learned that Kabul Bank was smuggling money out of the country. Now, after fears for its collapse led to customers taking their money out, it was bailed out by international donors in 2010. In April last year, President Karzai announced the bank would be put into receivership, which is a process in which most of its assets were transferred to a new bank. Then, in May of the same year, a report by an anti-corruption office said $467 million of loans were made without proper collateral. Now then, how will President Hamid Karzai handle the aftermath of the Kabul Bank scandal? Well, to help us answer this and other questions, we're joined by our guests in Kabul, Najib Azizi, a former economic advisor to the Afghan Ministry of Finance and a visiting professor at the economic faculty at Kabul University. Also in Kabul, Fahim Dashti, chief editor of Kabul Weekly and president of the Afghanistan National Journalists Union. Joining us from Dubai, Peter Middlebrook, Managing Director and CEO of Geopolicity Inc., an advisory consulting firm specializing in political and economic intelligence. Welcome to you all. If I can start with Najib Azizi in Kabul. You once advised this government when you look at the findings of this recent report, which suggests that there has been consistent, persistent political interference from President Karzai and some of his closest aides in this case in trying to undermine the ongoing investigation. How credible do you find this?
If we look at the history of Kabul Bank, its establishment, its development, and its basically fall down, it is very clear that it was the political elite who were playing the major role in making Kabul Bank as the major bank of Afghanistan in terms of the commercial banks. Like if we see all the salaries of the civil servants, the Afghanistan armed forces, it was channeled through this bank alone. And initially all the services which the government provides, and against that it receives the money like electricity, water, everyone had to pay only in this bank. So it means that within the government, within the cabinet of President Karzai, there was immense pressure and immense of understanding between all of them that we have to really flourish this bank. So it is very crystal clear that President Hamid Karzai and his you call it royal family, royal team, or his political allies, whatsoever people call them, they were all together into it. And I do understand that the current court, which has been established under special decree in order to look into it, it is a very credible information that the political elite of Afghanistan is interfering in this. Court cannot really come up with any conclusion, because we have already seen that though the judges in this tribunal, they are not qualified judges, they have no experiences of resolving financial disputes of this immense, the prosecutor is very weak, and at the same time the ones who are accused, some of them seems to be the major players, but some of other of them, they are very ordinary employees of the Kabul Bank who have been alleged, and I'm afraid that they will become the scapegoats.
Let's get another view, if you wouldn't mind, from Afghanistan, from Kabul as well. Fahim Dashti, how much of a cover-up was there then because of the involvement of some of the political elite allegedly in this fraud scheme? Because this report that was commissioned by the IMF that actually took place at the behest of the IMF suggested that Mr. Karzai himself and his office got involved and got in touch with some of the prosecutors investigating this case to tell them who should and who should not be indicted.
The involvement of politicians of the Kabul Bank crisis, it's quite clear here in Afghanistan. The reports which has been recently released emphasized on that. And some of the politicians, it didn't give the name, of course. On the report you cannot see any name. Some of the politicians were involved to this crisis. Some of them even trying to stop some regulations coming through the Afghanistan Bank in order to prevent this crisis prior to 2010. But I hardly believe that President Karzai himself or some people from his office was involved there, though the report says that one of the alleged people, Mr. Ferozi, have received about $9 million cash on the 2009 election to spend for one of the or some of the candidates, and it was very clear on those days that Mr. Ferozi was supporting the President Karzai camp. Still, when it comes to the political influence to the Kabul Bank issue, still the report says, and it's quite clear here in Afghanistan, that this political influence will stop any acceptable result or conclusion from this investigation. I mean, the money will not, Kabul Bank will not be able to regain all those money which was wasted by these people, the brother of president who is alleged to be one of them, the brother of vice president who is alleged to be one of them. So it's quite clear that Kabul Bank will not be able to regain those money.
Peter Middlebrook, beyond the idea of whether or not the money will be recouped at some later stage, and that is a big if, what about the way the indictments have taken place, the fact that some of the main players involved, and one of our guests just mentioned the name of the brother of the president, the brother of the first vice president, who were not indicted, whereas some 8 former and current staff members from the Afghan central bank were. What do you make of the way this whole situation, this whole case has been handled so far?
Well, first of all, I think the report is an excellent report, and I think it goes to the heart of the problem, which is you're establishing a framework for a market economy within a system of political patronage, where traditionally people got access to lines of credit or loans because of their patronage relationship. So really you've got a clash of civilizations. You've got between a kind of Western model of governance and another way of practice. But what's at stake here, I think the names are clear, but it's really about accountability. And what's at stake here, in my view, is not just depositors' money or whether $300, $400, $500 million will never be recovered. It's actually more fundamental than that. It's whether the international community are building a system that can sustain itself, and whether Afghans themselves are being part and co-opted into a system that they can feel is legitimate. And so the Kabul Bank itself is a far bigger crisis because, not just because of the bank, because of what it says about the accountability, not just of private sector interests, but the relationship between a public sector patronage and the Kabul Bank in this particular context. So I think the names aside for me, I'm sure there are lots of people who are implicated. What we don't wish to happen is for Afghanistan to become a cash and carry economy. And we're really on the edge of that, I think. And
so obviously what's at stake, and you've alluded to it, are the billions of dollars Western donor countries have poured into Afghanistan all these years. Will this bank scandal become a test case for whether or not Western donor countries will continue this type of international aid?
Well, it's a big question, obviously. I mean, not just billions, perhaps over $1 trillion has been invested. I mean, what's at stake is not a game. If you look at the fiscal framework of government at the moment, if the international community doesn't find a mutual partnership with government that can combat corruption, and the international community is kind of forced to some extent into trying to leverage better governance reform by removing some of the grants or loans that are in place, the government risks strategic failure. So this is not a game, in my view. The lessons from the Kabul Bank, for me, are actually quite pertinent. In a weak corporate governance environment where there's very little regulatory enforcement, the risks of starting down the route towards a private sector economy without the checks and balances in place that allow such regulatory standards to be in place really calls into question, I think, the sequence of the entire engagement in Afghanistan. And particularly around the 2014 presidential elections, but also the security transition, there's some mismessaging going on. There's a perception that the US is withdrawing. And that's actually not true. There's a strategic re-engagement of security forces. But there's a risk that people start to withdraw money to look for sweetheart deals because they believe that somehow this long decade of support is coming to an end. Well, what we actually need is something different.
Let's look then at the possible implications for the country. While the political elite, as we've been saying, allegedly siphoned off money, huge sums of money from Kabul Bank in Afghanistan, the country itself remains an extremely poor country. 36% of its population lives below the poverty line. 35%, that is more than 1 in 3 people, are unemployed. And this in a country whose economy brings in $1.4 billion from opium exports. That's 1/10 of Afghanistan's entire GDP, reliant on the drug trade. Najib Azizi, the amount of money involved is huge in this fraud scheme. Some $900 million, made even more significant by the dire situation economically that the country faces. In terms of the implications of this, how serious might it be for Afghanistan?
As Peter mentioned, it is a real test for the Afghan government. The Afghan government has to show that either they are serious to bring good governance into the country, to promote accountability and transparency, and above all, that the government believes in the establishment of sound financial systems in this country. Now, till time, it is very much proven that the government is not serious about any of them. And as we have mentioned, the basis of the report which was published by the Kroll extremely endangers the future of Afghanistan, that the political elite is getting involved into this whole situation, and they are trying to hide the realities and the facts, and they are trying to promote and basically indulge the non-actors and to show them and prove them that they were the main stakeholders in this whole crisis.
How much responsibility then? How much responsibility should the president? How much responsibility should the president himself bear? Because we know that the government has known about this since late 2009. They've known that massive amounts of money were actually being sent off on Pamir Airlines in food trays, and yet they did absolutely nothing about it.
See, those are all important things, that how the money was transferred abroad. But above all, the Minister of Finance of Afghanistan, just a couple of months back, when he was accused of different types of corruptions, including of taking money from Kabul Bank, he has explicitly accepted that he was given money by Kabul Bank for the political campaign of President Karzai in the last elections. Now, if we are talking about real democracies in the West, if such accusations comes against any president, he will resign on the spot. However, we are talking about a very special case here, which is called Afghanistan. So here, morally and ethically, people do not consider resignations as part of their responsibility. However, coming back to towards your specific question, I think President Karzai do understand that it is not only that the reports, different types of reports, have accused him of taking money from Kabul Bank, and above all, his brother, Mr. Mahmoud Karzai, he has been accused of taking $35 million, and instead of accepting it, like Sherkhan Farnood or Khalil, they accept that they have taken the money, and they will pay it when they get it. However, Mahmoud Karzai is time and again mentioned it to the media that he has taken only $5 million and he has settled it. The rest of $30 million, he does not accept it. So it is a big question mark that if political influences will come continuously from President Karzai on this tribunal or on any other tribunal, we will not move ahead. And the Afghan people, on one hand, will lose their trust in the systems that have been developed over the last 10 years, and at the same time, the international community will lose their interest. So I may just add one more point, that if we want a resolution for this problem, I would suggest that an independent international judicial commission should look into this issue in order to find out the real culprits, and they should come up with real recommendations that how we can really save the financial sector of Afghanistan. Because already last week, the governor of the State Bank of Afghanistan mentioned that there are 4 more commercial banks which are staying at, which are basically operating at a D grade. It is not A or B or C, it is a D grade, which means that they were given a warning for 3 months that either they have to bring massive changes in their management and in their operation style, otherwise they will be also, the control of the banks will be taken by the Central Bank of Afghanistan.
Let me turn to Fahim Dashti. Do you share this perspective that none of the institutions in Afghanistan today can handle this properly, that it needs to bring in an international entity of some sort? How much faith do Afghans have in their own system, legal system, political system, being able to manage this properly?
Oh, well, it was quite clear that most of the Afghans, especially those who are putting their money on the banking system of Afghanistan, were extremely disappointed. They lost their faith on the banking system of Afghanistan. It seems that most of the banks who are active in Afghanistan are facing crisis at the moment, and this is because of losing of faith of the customers. Another point to be raised regarding your previous question about President Karzai. So he has 1.5 years maximum to resolve this problem to regain his credibility among the Afghans. Otherwise, the upcoming government, or maybe the next one, finally somebody will come and investigate this case, and President Karzai could be blamed for lack of action, lack of proper action regarding this case. Of course, the alleged people, be it his brother or the brother of his vice president, they will be finally bringing justice. So it's very good for the President Karzai to do something in the upcoming year. Otherwise, he will pay for it in the long term.
Peter Middlebrook, based on your experience, your knowledge of this government, what do you think will President Karzai do in this forthcoming year? Can he do very much, or will it depend on the IMF taking some pretty drastic measures, withdrawing some financial support for a while? What will it take for lessons to be learned, for this type of fraud not to be repeated?
Well, in my view, I think we need to acknowledge that Afghanistan, after 10 years, there have been some significant gains, but there are some real structural weaknesses, not just in terms of the regulations, but regulatory enforcement capacities. And we all know how the system works. You know, you go to somebody in a senior position, they write a letter to the head of a bank, and next thing there's political pressure to do something. It's not about individuals, it's about the entire management system itself. But the risks, again, are profound. I personally am not sure what can be done internally. The Afghan justice system is not very strong. I don't think people would have much faith in that. Very real risk that kind of lower level people who are functionaries within banks would become blamed. Again, what's at stake here is the legitimacy of really the reform program itself, and that's really why it's so significant. I don't think anyone's opposing, as the IMF has done, is appoint international independent people to take a viewpoint of it. Unfortunately, the justice itself still needs to take place within the country. But let's stand back and ask ourselves again about the sequencing. What capacities are required of a small state to be able to manage this process? I know recently, as you've been reporting, there's moves to establish a stock exchange. Can you imagine how difficult that is to be able to regulate? So these regulatory compliance issues, in my view, are ultimately very key. They will not be solved very quickly between now and 2014. This is a decade-long endeavor, in my view.
Najib Azizi, what will the future depend on for Afghans to regain some faith in their government, in their system of governance? How important will it be, at the very least, that some of these culprits be prosecuted and convicted?
Unless and until the real culprits of the Kabul Bank scandal are brought forward and they are put on trial, the Afghan people will not be having any interest in understanding that how many of the innocents and how many of the lower ranking employees of the banks were put on trial and how many of them were punished. Because the Afghan people are very much interested that if we're talking about the next 10 years or the next 2 years in particular, that how the Afghan government behaves and how the Afghan government really exhibits that it is a responsible government towards its people, and it understands that the development of the country is very much dependent on the savings of the ordinary Afghans rather than the regular inflow of the foreign aid by the foreigners. And President Karzai, on occasions, he has talked about the self-dependency of the Afghans. And if his actions and words do not match with each other, then the people of Afghanistan will be very much disappointed, and they will not have any faith in the political system that we have invested billions and trillions of dollars in it, or the economic institutions that we have built over the last decade. They will not believe in any of them, and they will.
Are the right people being pursued, though, or are those trying to uncover some of this case being persecuted?
It will be very important if people are prosecuted in the right manner. And again, I don't have any intentions to do any contempt of the courts of Afghanistan. However, I do know that we do not have any qualified judges who can really handle the intensity of the financial corruption that has taken place in the commercial banks in Afghanistan. So it is very important that we bring qualified people, either as advisors or as an independent commission or as an independent tribunal, to look into it so that the people do realize that it is a fair trial. There is no political scandalization of this Kabul Bank problem, and people should be given the surety that the government is not interfering in one way or the other way in order to save some of the culprits and to bring some scapegoats instead of them.
We'll have to leave our discussion here. Thanks very much to all our guests in Kabul, Najib Azizi, also in Kabul, Fahim Dashti, and Peter Middlebrook in Dubai. And thank you very much, as always, for joining us on Inside Story. Send us your feedback by emailing us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From Merida Fakhri and the entire team, thanks very much for watching.